Hi class, this is Dr. Grace, and I wanted to give you a little bit of information about preparing and applying for grad school in psychology. And I found in my resources that I have available is this great PDF of slides from Dr. Norcross and Dr. Hogan, who have already prepared a whole lot of information. So I figured work smarter, not harder, and that I would present a few of their things that I think are most important when we are preparing for graduate school in psychology. So this is all of their information. I'm hopefully going to bring in some good information from my own experiences, but do know that this is a presentation that I'm kind of taking over and utilizing. Just so you know, these handouts are available on the APA website, as well as information like videos that you can watch. Again, I'm just going to highlight the things that I think are most important. So what is grad school in psychology like? Well, if you're watching this, typically you are probably in one of my classes, which means that you are getting your BA or your BS. Of course, you've worked hard for these 4 years to do so. Next steps that you can do are get an MA or an MS in psychology. That could be counseling psychology, clinical psychology, or even the marriage and family therapy option. There's also the master's in social work and a master's in education that you can get, which is another 2 years on top of these 4 that you're already in school. School psych takes a little bit longer. You can also go the route of the PsyD, which is the psychology doctorate. It's focused more on practice compared to the PhD, which is sometimes more focused on research. I actually think that the 4.5 and 6 years is kind of a misnomer. I think they're both about 6 years to complete them. And individuals vary on how long some of these programs take to work. So just so you know, psychology degrees have been increasing annually, especially at the bachelor's and the master's program. As you can see, doctoral programs are still relatively low on how many degrees they award. So this is where we get some of those ideas about things being a little bit more competitive at this point in time. Because, doctoral programs aren't necessarily increasing, but the number of psychology students are. So many students ask this, should I get a master's first, right? So there's not that many doctoral programs out there. Should I actually get a master's first? I actually really like this advice. Yes, it can remedy shortcomings. So for example, if you want to get into a PhD program and you don't have very much research experience as an undergrad, this can actually really remedy those shortcomings. Can demonstrate, yep, I know how to do my research, and so I am now ready for a doctoral program. It can enhance your credentials. So for example, if you don't graduate with a strong GPA, it could enhance those things. I'm not sure what this comment about for PsyD programs in particular, so I'm going to skip over that. Yeah, and just because you do have your master's, it does not necessarily enhance any shortcomings that you have, but it can definitely help boost it. But if, for example, you don't do well in your master's program, this will actually make it worse for you to actually apply to a PhD if that's the route that you want to go to. So you do have to think about that, and this might be a good time just to evaluate for yourself. Am I really ready for a graduate program? So I think this is really important for you to first reflect on why are you going to apply to graduate school. If this is just because, I have this idea that I want to be a therapist, well, ask yourself, do you really want to spend 6 years going to grad school? A lot of programs are not reimbursed, so the cost of going to grad school can be substantial and can be a little bit more costly than doing your undergrad, for example. Even if you're just doing your master's, those 2 years could potentially be a little bit more costly. Competition is very stiff, especially for the PhD programs. So if you're really interested in PhD programs, really ask yourself, do I want to be doing research? Is that what I want to do for the next 6 years of my life? Am I going to be happy doing that? So really make sure you really want to go. And another thing is that it does cost money to apply to schools. So you might want to consider about the financial burden of actually applying right now. The other thing is applying wisely. So a lot of students will do this where they would love to go into a PhD program, but aren't sure whether or not their application is going to be strong enough. So a lot of students, what they'll do is they'll apply to PhD programs and then apply to some master's programs as well. So having a range of schools, either, different levels, so PhD versus master's, or even the range of schools. So you might have that dream school that you want to get into, but make sure you're applying to other types of schools that are maybe not the most competitive to get into. I agree that even a short informational session is not enough to really understand and know whether or not you want to go into these different programs. So some books, I really like this Insider's Guide to Graduate Programs, which is actually done by Norcross, who is one of the authors of these slides. And I think that the Insider's Guide is so good at breaking down the programs. So they tell you things like how research heavy are they versus how clinical focused they are. I think that there's a whole lot of good information there that is really contained in this book. So I highly recommend getting this book if you are interested in clinical or counseling programs. I haven't personally read this Graduate Study in Psychology from the APA, but if they're advising it, I am going to say that's a good source. Oops. And here's some other ones. There's this complete guide, and then Psych-Hi. So Psych-Hi has a magazine that's out there, and you can actually get the magazine even if you are not a Psych-Hi member. So just search Psych-Hi and you'll see that they have a good, blog posts and everything else. Monitor on Psychology might also have that. So the Eye on Psych-Hi, I would definitely recommend going there to see if there's some good information for you. I also really like this idea of going into specialized resources that are there. So for example, all APA is made up of lots of divisions, and some of these divisions will actually have information about how do you get into them. So for example, PSYOP is the one for industrial organizational psychology. So if you're really interested in applying to IO programs, you'll want to go to PSYOP and actually look through the materials that they have. Like SFN, the Society for Neuroscience, really goes about neuroscience departments. The ABCT is the Association for Behavioral and Cognitive Therapy. So if you want to be a therapist, those might be some good ones. And they have some, based on who you are as a student. So if you, identify as being a student of color, there is some good information there. Disabilities, the APA, the American Psychological Association of Graduate Students is also another place to find it. So this was just an overview of some of the sources that you can get into, and we'll talk a little bit more about some specifics in the next videos.